Have you ever found yourself lying in bed at night staring at the ceiling, replaying a conversation that didn't quite end the way you wanted? Maybe someone cut you off before you could finish your point, or you sent a message that never got a reply. Hours later, your brain is still chewing on it, turning it over again and again, almost as if it refuses to let go until something, anything, gives it closure. This isn't just you being overly sensitive or dramatic. It's a universal quirk of the human mind. Our brains are hardwired to crave completion, and when something is left unfinished, it pulls at us like an itch that demands to be scratched. The title of today's video asks, what captures our attention more? A story that ends neatly or one that breaks off midstream? The surprising truth is that, more often than not, it's the incomplete story that clings to us most tightly. And understanding why can change the way you watch shows, navigate relationships, and even work with your own memory to grow as a person. Psychologists have a name for this, the Zeigarnik effect, discovered in the 1920s by a researcher named Zeigarnik. She noticed something curious while sitting in a cafe in Vienna. Waiters had excellent recall of complicated orders: who ordered the steak rare, who wanted extra bread, who asked for the wine list, right up until the bills were paid. Once the transaction was complete, the memory of those details seemed to vanish almost immediately. Unfinished tasks stuck in memory, while finished ones faded. What does this tell us? That the human mind has a natural bias toward the unresolved. We hold on to what's incomplete because, on some deep level, the brain is wired to finish patterns, to close loops, to resolve the tension that open questions create. It's why cliffhangers at the end of your favorite TV series make you desperate for the next season. It's why unfinished conversations can haunt you for weeks. And it's why, even in daily life, we can feel more drawn to the undone than the done. Think about a melody you know well. If someone plays the first few notes of Happy Birthday and then stops right before the final line, you'll feel an almost physical urge to hum the missing part. It's uncomfortable to leave it hanging. Your brain wants closure. The same principle applies to thoughts, stories, and experiences. Incomplete stories demand your attention because your mind treats them like open files. It refuses to close the tab until the job is done. That might sound inconvenient, but it's also part of how we learn and grow. It ensures that problems don't just slip through the cracks. The brain uses incompleteness as a way to keep important things on your radar. But here's where it gets tricky. In the modern world, this quirk is constantly being used against you. Entertainment industries know this well. Why do TV shows end on cliffhangers? Why do video games dangle quests that never quite resolve? Because creators know that if they leave you with an open loop, your mind will keep coming back, craving resolution. Social media works the same way. Endless feeds rarely give you a sense of completion. They always leave you with another unfinished scroll, another notification that lingers unresolved. This keeps you hooked because your brain doesn't know how to let go of an unfinished cycle. Now, you might be thinking, if incompleteness captures so much of my attention, does that mean I'm doomed to be trapped by unfinished loops forever? Not at all. Here's where understanding becomes power. When you learn to notice this bias toward incompletion, you can stop being passively dragged by it and start actively using it. Think of it as a mental toolkit. Instead of letting unfinished business haunt you, you can harness it to drive progress, creativity, and even resilience. Let's start with creativity. Many writers, artists, and thinkers have noticed that deliberately stopping mid-idea can make their work more powerful. Ernest Hemingway had a method where he would end his writing day not when he ran out of steam, but when he knew what came next. That way, when he sat down the following morning, his brain was already primed to pick up the thread. By leaving things unfinished, he kept his creative momentum alive. You can try the same with your own projects. If you're working on something challenging, don't always push until you're completely exhausted. Instead, stop at a point where you know what the next step will be. Your brain will keep working on it in the background, and you'll return with energy and clarity. Next, let's talk about relationships. We've all experienced the discomfort of unresolved tension, an argument that ended without closure, a friendship that drifted away without explanation. These unfinished emotional stories can linger far longer than we'd like. One way to work with this is through intentional closure rituals. If you can't get an answer from someone else, you can create a symbolic ending for yourself. For example, writing a letter you never send or journaling about the conversation you wish you had can give your brain the sense of completion it craves. It may not solve the external situation, but it helps your inner world let go of the open loop. Another area where unfinished stories shape us is memory itself. Research shows that we remember incomplete tasks more vividly than completed ones. If you've ever had the nagging feeling that you forgot to do something, it's your brain holding on to that unclosed loop. Interestingly, this can be used to your advantage. If you need to remember something important, start it but don't finish it. For instance, if you need to study, begin reading or summarizing a text but deliberately leave it unfinished before taking a break. Your brain will continue processing the material during the pause, strengthening your recall when you come back. In other words, the very thing that frustrates you, your brain's inability to let go of the unfinished, can become a secret ally in learning. But what about the downsides? Because it's not always helpful. In fact, this tendency to hold on to unfinished loops can make us feel trapped in cycles of anxiety. Imagine a conversation with a colleague where you said something awkward. If you don't get a chance to clarify or resolve it, your brain might replay it over and over. The same goes for projects you never complete or goals you abandon halfway through. They don't just vanish, they haunt you. The solution here isn't to complete everything. You can't, and trying to would only make life more stressful. The solution is awareness and deliberate closure. Sometimes that means finishing the task. Other times it means making peace with not finishing it. You can tell yourself, this loop is closed not because I solved it, but because I've chosen to set it down. That act of conscious release can be just as powerful as actual completion. This brings us to the deeper philosophical angle. Why does incompleteness bother us so much? Because it points at something fundamental about being human. Life itself is full of unfinished stories. We leave conversations half-spoken, projects half-built, dreams half-lived, and we never really know how many of our own stories will get an ending. On some level, the discomfort we feel with unfinished things mirrors our discomfort with mortality and uncertainty. We long for closure because closure feels like control. When life is messy and unresolved, an unfinished task becomes a miniature reflection of that bigger uncertainty. But there's also freedom in this recognition. If you can learn to accept incompleteness, not fight it, but work with it, you develop resilience. You discover that you don't need every story to be finished in order to live fully. Sometimes the very act of holding space for the unfinished makes you wiser. This is where practices like mindfulness come in. Instead of trying to force every thought to its conclusion, mindfulness teaches you to observe the open loops without being consumed by them. You notice the itch without scratching it. At first, this feels impossible, but with practice, it creates a new kind of strength, the ability to live with unresolved stories without letting them dominate you. And paradoxically, the less you resist incompleteness, the less grip it has on you. At this point, you might already be reflecting on your own life. What are the unfinished stories that still hold your attention? Is it a relationship you never got closure on? A goal you half pursued? A project that still lives in the back of your mind? These are not failures, they are invitations. Each one is a signal from your brain, pointing to something meaningful. The trick is not to be tormented by them, but to decide consciously. Which of these loops deserve completion? Which deserve symbolic closure? And which can remain open as part of the larger flow of life? When you shift from being dragged by unfinished stories to choosing how to engage with them, you reclaim agency. This is why the question, what grabs your attention more, a story that ends or one that breaks off, is more than just about entertainment or memory tricks. It's about how you live. If you can use the brain's craving for completion as a tool, you gain an edge in creativity, learning, relationships, and emotional balance. If you let it use you, you risk being pulled endlessly into cycles of unfinished loops, scrolling, replaying, regretting, and repeating. The choice, as always, lies in awareness. So how do you start applying this knowledge in a way that genuinely changes your day-to-day life? Let's walk through a few practical exercises you can use as tools to manage the effect of unfinished stories rather than being managed by them. First, try the technique of the conscious micro-pause. The next time you find yourself looping on an unfinished task or conversation, instead of fighting the urge to complete it in your mind, deliberately pause and acknowledge, "This is my brain keeping an open loop." Naming it reduces its grip because you shift from being inside the loop to observing it from the outside. Second, experiment with the intentional cliffhanger. If you're struggling to maintain momentum in a long project, whether it's studying for an exam, writing a paper, or even decluttering a room, don't stop when you're drained. Stop when you know what the next step will be. Write down a sentence that begins the next section. Leave your desk with one task clearly defined for tomorrow, or stop cleaning when one corner remains undone. That unfinished piece will create just enough tension to pull you back with energy, rather than resistance the following day. Third, create closure rituals for areas of life that may never give you the resolution you want. This is especially powerful for relationships or life chapters that ended abruptly. If you can't get the closure from another person, you can give it to yourself symbolically. Write down what you wish you could have said, then tear up the paper or place it in a box. Perform a small act that says to your brain, "This loop is now closed." It might sound simple, even strange, but rituals are a language your subconscious understands. They tell your mind, you can let this one go. Another tool you can try is productive incompleteness. If you're trying to build a new habit like exercising or journaling, deliberately leave each session feeling like you could have done a little more. Instead of exhausting yourself, finish with a sense of unfinished business. Your brain will keep tugging at the thread, pulling you back into the activity again and again until it becomes second nature. Athletes often use this by ending workouts before they hit total fatigue, creating a positive craving to return the next day. The Zeigarnik effect in this sense becomes a motivational ally. Now let's zoom out to a larger perspective. Think about the stories you consume daily: shows, books, social media threads. The reason cliffhangers hook you isn't just because writers are manipulative. It's because they're working with the very structure of your mind. When you know this, you can be more intentional about what you let occupy your attention. You might decide to delay watching a new series until several seasons are released, so you aren't left agonizing over unfinished arcs. Or you might limit how much time you spend in endless scrolling environments that never resolve, because you understand those platforms are designed to hijack your brain's craving for completion. In this way, awareness becomes freedom. There's also a deeper opportunity here, to use the discomfort of incompleteness as a mirror. When you notice yourself obsessing over an unfinished loop, ask, what is this really pointing to? Why does this feel so important to complete? Often, unfinished stories reveal your values. You replay a conversation because it mattered to your sense of respect. You dwell on a half-finished project because it connects to your identity as someone who wants to create. You can treat these loops not as irritations, but as clues to what your deeper self actually cares about. Sometimes the most powerful growth comes not from closing the loop, but from listening to what the loop is trying to tell you. And this brings us to perhaps the most empowering insight of all. Not every story needs to be finished. Some will always remain incomplete. Some will never get the neat, satisfying conclusion you want. And yet, that doesn't have to be a weakness. In fact, it can be a source of strength. Learning to live with open loops without letting them dominate you is a form of psychological resilience. It teaches you patience, acceptance, and humility. It reminds you that life itself is never neatly wrapped up. There will always be conversations unsaid, projects unfinished, and dreams only partially realized. But rather than being crushed by that, you can see it as part of the richness of being human. So let me leave you with a challenge. Today, notice just one unfinished loop in your life. Maybe it's a task you keep postponing, a conversation you keep replaying, or a story that's still tugging at you. Instead of letting it silently drain your attention, bring it into the light. Ask yourself, does this deserve to be finished? Does it need symbolic closure? Or can I let it remain open without giving it power over me? That small act of awareness transforms the unfinished from a burden into a tool. Because ultimately, your brain's love of unfinished stories isn't a flaw. It's a feature. It's the reason you learn, create, remember, and care. The challenge is to take the driver's seat, to use that craving for completion consciously instead of being unconsciously pulled by it. When you do, you gain not only clarity but freedom. If this exploration of unfinished stories helped you see your own mind in a new way, share it with someone who might also be replaying loops in their head. And don't forget to subscribe to Mind Unlocked, your weekly toolkit for better thinking. Together, we'll keep turning the quirks of the brain into practical wisdom, so you can slow down, reflect, and make choices with clarity and intention, even when the story is unfinished.